IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. On the podcast today, we speak with Juhi Gupta from the blog forumhopping.com. Juhi shares her experience traveling across the state of Meghalaya, also known as the abode of clouds. Let's hop onto the episode and find out more about her journey. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Juhi Gupta, a lawyer and a blogger at forumhopping.wordpress.com. Hi Juhi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to make my podcast debut on your podcast.
Yeah, I am the culprit here, making Juhi wait for such a long time to get on the podcast. I think it was almost 2 years ago that Juhi and I started the conversation about having her on the podcast. And after a series of things, we finally end up having you on the podcast today and also having a lawyer on the podcast. So, Juhi, the intro I gave about you was pretty short and concise, about your blog. So why don't you enlighten us a little bit more about yourself and your blog as well? I find the name very interesting.
Sure. Like I said, one, I'm really excited to be here also because I've always wanted to actually be on a podcast. So the fact that I'm getting to do a travel podcast is very exciting. The bit about myself, like this is the time I always struggle because I always want to say something interesting, but I never am able to come up with anything interesting apart from saying that I'm from Bangalore. I've been born and brought up here. I live in Delhi right now, and I'm a lawyer at a law firm. I think I don't want to elaborate more about that because it's frankly a bit boring. But the more exciting part of my personality is that, like many of us, I love traveling. And yeah, I do run with friends this travel blog called Forum Hopping. It's really as a hobby. But yeah, just a bit about the name. Because we're lawyers, the bunch of us who run it, we couldn't think of anything too imaginative. So we came up with something which is actually a spin-off of a legal term. So for any lawyers listening out here, they'll probably understand. But to put it very simply, there's a concept in law called forum shopping, where you try and go to different courts to sort of pursue your case. So it's a spin on shopping to say forum hopping, because forum basically being place over here, not courts, obviously. And the hope was that amongst the four of us, we would be traveling enough around the world to write about it. But like I said, it's a hobby. So Saif, if you've seen the blog, it's not like we're regularly churning out content, but we would like to believe that when we write about something, it's with a lot of passion and really, conveying our experience with the mix of practical tips. So the travel part of my personality is something I really like, which is why I'm really enjoying coming on a travel podcast. That's pretty much about me.
No, thank you. Thank you for shedding some light on the name and the wordplay with forum shopping and forum hopping. And yeah, you guys are definitely going places, right? Maybe not in the legal parlance, but you are going places. So I'm glad that we have you on the podcast. And very interesting blog as well. We'll link it in the show notes so that our listeners can check it out. And tell us about where you're taking us to today, Juhi.
Yeah, so today I want to take all of you to Meghalaya, which we have blogged about earlier this year. So this is a trip I did actually last year in October with this travel company called Chalo Hoppo. I know, Saif, you featured guests on your podcast before who have traveled with Chalo Hoppo, but just in case there are people who haven't heard about them, and I was one of them who, until this Meghalaya trip, somehow had not come across Chalo Hoppo, but I'm very glad I did. They are basically a travel company that specializes in travel in Northeast. And they do group trips, they do customized trips. So I went with them on what they call their Kasi and Jaintia Hills chapter, which is a group trip in the first week of October. It was literally, I think it was it was by far my favorite vacation in 2022, but it's also, I think, one of the best places I've traveled to. I was like really, really amazed by Meghalaya.
Yeah, awesome. And like you rightly mentioned, we have had, even though we've not had Chalo Hopper on the podcast, this is probably their hat trick episode, right? This is the third time somebody
I'm feeling
who's
the
traveled with
pressure
Chalo
now.
Hopper. Yeah, but Chalo Hopper has been on the podcast, and yeah, the pretty much the OG travel company in the Northeast, I would say, really help curate authentic experiences there. So definitely check them out, and we'll make sure to link them as well in the show notes. But tell us a little bit more about your trip and about Meghalaya, right? I mean,
Yeah,
even before we get into the specifics of the trip itself, can you do some context setting in terms of
sure.
one mapping out Meghalaya on the map for somebody who might not be aware of the place of the state,
Yeah.
and also. You mentioned you traveled in October. How long of an itinerary was this?
Yeah, sure. So Meghalaya is one of the states of India in the northeast. So it's also called one of India's seven sisters. The seven sisters being the states in the northeast. It's also I think since the colonial times called the Scotland of the East. So that's another name that's popularly associated with it. So just geographically speaking, you have to the north and the east you have Assam, and then to the south and the west you have Bangladesh. So it shares borders with Assam and Bangladesh. Based on my experience with Chalo Hopper and from what I understand in general, you would typically land in Guwahati in Assam. And then from there, you can. I mean, Shillong has an airport, but from what I understand, the commercial flights are very limited. So I think typically people land in Guwahati and then you can drive to Shillong. And I think Meghalaya, your journey usually starts from Shillong. And just before coming to the itinerary with Chalo Hopper, I think so. Meghalaya, just to give a sense, you have these three mountain ranges. So, like I mentioned, the Chalo Hopper trip was called the Kasi and Jaintia Hills chapter. So, the Kasi Hills are the ones in the center. I think those are the ones which are the highest mountains. On the east, you have the Jaintia Hills, and on the west, you have the Garo Hills. So, the Chalo Hopper itinerary I went on didn't cover the Garo Hills. And yeah, I mean, like Meghalaya, I think just some fun facts. People may know this. We also study it in school, I think. It's one of the few states in India. I don't know if it's one of the few in India which has historically followed a matrilineal system, which I found very fascinating. So basically, the lineage, everything, the inheritance and the lineage are traced through the women. And it's the youngest daughter who inherits all the wealth and takes care of the parents. Another thing I think we've all studied in school in India is that it's Meghalaya is the wettest region in India. So
Right.
two of the world's wettest places, so Mawsynram and Cherrapunji, are in Meghalaya. And it's often compared to London, Meghalaya, the weather, because you can, and I saw this for myself, like you can
Right.
literally experience all the seasons in a span of like 30 minutes. So it'll be sunny, it'll be raining, it'll be foggy, it'll be hot. So you have to be prepared for anything. You should carry an umbrella with you, you should carry your shades with you. And when I mean all the time, literally all the time, because you're just better off that way. So umbrella, shades, wind cheater, raincoat, just prepare for everything. And, like depending on when you go, and we can talk about this further, like you'll be in the water a lot. So, just in terms of like being prepared for that. And yeah, coming to like the itinerary and like maybe when's a good time to go. So we, like I said, the Chalo Hopper trip was planned in the first week of October, specifically 1st to 8th October. So it was just on the back of the monsoons finishing. Although, like I said, we got enough and plenty rain. So you would almost think the monsoon is still going on. But like what they'd call officially the monsoon season was done. I think with Meghalaya, though, from what I understood while I was traveling there and speaking generally to people, you could really choose to go whenever. And I think the nature of your experience may change. So you may go in monsoons and yeah, it'll be very wet, but I guess you get to see all the waterfalls in all their glory, and Meghalaya has a lot of waterfalls. You could go sort of literally post monsoon the way I went, and because the monsoons have just finished, everything is just so green and like fresh, and like all the waterfalls are full of water, the lakes, rivers. So that's also very interesting. You could go and you could also go, I think a very popular time is your November to Feb time, when it's supposed to not be raining much, but it is very cold. But then things like caving and all happen in those months because it's not raining that much, and Meghalaya has many caves. It seems to be one of those places where as long as you're prepared for what you could be getting into, you could go whenever.
Yeah, 100%. And also, like, just from some of the things you're mentioning, even in terms of diversity, right? You could do a bunch of things going
Absolutely.
at different times of the year, right? Right from caving to even like above the ground, right? Right from the beautiful forest to the
Yeah.
waterfalls to these water bodies. There's so much beauty to see. And still, I would say, I know in the last maybe a decade or a little bit over that, it's has opened up and more people are traveling that, but I would still say this is still a bit unexplored overall, looking at it from that perspective. But thanks so much for setting up some context here. And one interesting trivia I came across as well while looking up or on the episode, while preparing for the episode, was that Meghalaya was actually formed in 1972, right? Before
Yeah.
that, it used to be a part of Assam, and then it was carved out of Assam to form the state of Meghalaya. So, just another fact to add there to the list
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
all of the wonderful things you mentioned. So, cool. Let's dive into the specifics of your itinerary, and already from the things you've been saying, it has me excited. I know we did one other episode on the caves in Meghalaya, and that turned out to be a very interesting and a very different type of episode. So this time I'm looking to explore a lot more of the natural beauty, especially when it's with Chalo Hopo and you, it's even more exciting. So yeah, why don't you take us with you and walk us through the overall itinerary where you started, and just maybe we could pick it up place by place and talk through your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just one overall thing, just picking up on what you said, I think for me, really what stood out in Meghalaya was the natural beauty. Like I had moments repeatedly where I was just like, wow, what am I seeing? And, it's just pure, unfiltered, natural beauty. Like it almost seems like, those desktop wallpapers, and you're just seeing it in front of you. And I had so many moments where I would like get out of the, what do you call it, the traveler we were sort of using the whole time, and you're like, wow, where am I? Like the color of the sky, the color of the water, the green of the vegetation. It was, yeah, like I really was spellbound so many times. But just, yeah, sorry, starting with the I tend to digress with Meghalaya because the beauty just really
No.
astounded me. But yeah,
Yeah.
starting with the itinerary. So like I said, we all landed in Guwahati, and from there, sort of, we were in Chalo Hopo's hands. And just to give some context for those who want to just know more about Chalo Hopo in this context, the group was just like 7 of us. So it was a very good size. So we started from Guwahati, and the plan is to basically on day one, make your way to Shillong. You stop for lunch or whatever. But on the way, we stopped at the first stop was this place called Umiam or Umiam Lake. It's this huge, really huge man-made reservoir. Actually, they call it a lake, but it's a man-made reservoir, and it's like very, very picturesque, like anything else in Meghalaya. It's nestled between these hills, and I think it's locally known as the dam state because there is a dam there. So you're damming the Umayam River, basically.
Right.
And it's nestled between the hills. And yeah, I mean, you could do boating and stuff there if you want to. Near the lake, they have this sort of, for lack of better words, there's this forest area where they have these bridges you can walk on, quite high bridges, like easy, not the root bridges, like normal bridges. And you can walk on it, and you really do feel like you're walking in the trees because you're quite high, and it's this thick vegetation. And so yeah, it's fun. Like from there, you can see the aerial views of the lake. So it was a good first stop in Meghalaya. And then from there, people who don't know, Shillong is notorious for its traffic. So as you get closer to Shillong, you do hit that evening traffic. So it was a bit late by the time we reached Shillong. And that same night, we went to a very popular cafe in Shillong called Dylan's Cafe, which, as the name suggests, it pays homage to Bob Dylan. Food was good, music was great, and like the vibe was very nice. And they have this very creative graffiti on the ceiling with all these music albums and stuff. So it's a nice, tastefully done cafe. And actually, I think people may know this. I mean, Shillong is known as the rock capital of India. It sort of makes sense. And I mean, like, I'm a big Bollywood fan, so for anyone else who's out there, they should know that Rock On 2 was shot in parts of Meghalaya, including Shillong. And I think they just, like, because it makes sense, right? I mean, Shillong is supposed to be the rock capital of India. And even while we were walking through the streets of Shillong, we could hear, like, jamming sessions and rock music playing from just different houses and all. It was quite nice. So this was our first day. The second day was, I think, like, really the highlight of the trip, especially for me at least. We did this sort of thing called, I call it a river trek because it really effectively was that. It's an excursion from Shillong, a day excursion. It's in this place called Mollingbana. And really, like, I think had I not, let's say, had I done Meghalaya on my own, I may not have known about this place, or even if I did, I would not have. It would not be something I would include in my itinerary because I'm someone who doesn't know how to swim. I'm scared of water. I've never swam even with a life jacket on. And I had to do all of these things in Molingbana. So, but it was really, I mean, I can say this now in hindsight, it was amazing. So it's not your typical sightseeing thing, but I feel it's another different way of experiencing a place because a lot of Meghalaya is about the water,
Sure.
So basically it's this excursion we did. It takes around a couple of hours. You have to leave from Shillong early to avoid traffic and so that you come back in time in the evening. On the way, you pass through the world's wettest region, which is Ram. So I was very excited about that. You also have these pit stops on the way if you want to take them, where you're literally looking out into such. I mean, like, yeah, you're just in the hills, looking out to like this beautiful valley, and in the distance you can see Bangladesh. So it's all very like things you read about maybe, and you're experiencing it. And yeah, the river trek is basically like literally that, right? So you have to cross from point A to point B. And it involves swimming, it involves, what do you call it, rappelling, sliding down things, cliff jumping. Luckily, that was optional. I don't think I would have been able to do that if it was mandatory. But yeah, it's really like, I think Chalo Hoppo describes it as a natural playground. And you're just in the water for like 2-3 hours. And for me, very adventurous because for reasons like I mentioned, right? For someone who doesn't know swimming and is doing this for the first time, it can be a little daunting. But having said that, of course, Chalo Hoppo's volunteers were there to help and they're really good. I felt really safe with them as someone who's doing it for the first time. But all of this was very fun. And so I think by this point of time, Saif, I think I had lost track of time, but I would like to believe it was at least 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, because in Meghalaya, another thing is days start early, right? Given the location.
Sure.
So you're a bit distorted. Whether you're coming from like Bangalore or Delhi, your conception of day evening is a little because there the sun sets by 5:30. So and it's it could be sunny one time and literally in the next 30 minutes it could become so dark. But I would like to believe it was around 1 or 2. But even after kayaking in Umka Khoi Lake, the excursion part of it didn't end. So we were told, where we were supposed to go back from where we had parked the traveler, on the way back, we stopped and did this detour to something called the Split Rock. So it's basically like this huge rock which has a fissure in the middle, and it's I think around 60 meters deep. And apparently it was split into 2 because of an earthquake in like all the way back in 1897. And so when you look down, it's like complete darkness. And then you're told that you can go down there. And I was just like, please don't tell us we have to like do some rappelling or something down. But no, there's no rappelling involved. But there's this. You have to maneuver like a stretch, like these stones and boulders and go down this bamboo ladder and then you can go down to the fissure.
Okay.
So it's a bit cool. And for those who are well versed in sort of rock climbing, so like our guide, the Chalo Hoppo guide, Nick, who's amazing. That could be a whole other episode. He's like almost like Spider-Man. So he was just doing his fancy rock climbing things. But for the rest of us, we were just glad we made it down alive. No, I'm making it sound a little scary. This was actually the more doable part of the whole day. But yeah, it's a fun. You're there, you're down in the fissure, do whatever you can, I guess, hang around and then make your way back up. So, and then finally, we got back to the place where we had parked our traveler and where we sat down for what I want to say a very well-deserved lunch, and we ate a lot. And then you make your way back to Shillong, which took very long because as soon as you hit like Shillong, you get a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically by the time you get back to Shillong, it's around like 8 or 9 at night.
Okay, so it's a fun day trip pretty much,
Yeah.
right? And you're doing all of this. I'm sure I would have slept my way through the return journey.
I think all of us were high on adrenaline by then, so we didn't sleep. But yeah, by night you're just like, okay, I'm ready to pass out.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other thing I found very interesting was the kayaking that you did on the Umkakoi
Yeah.
lake that you mentioned, right? Beside the lake as well, like there was almost these little craters, you could say, right? But filled with water. I don't know if you came across those, but I found those also like geological formations, I think, and because of water staying there or flowing down in a certain fashion, they've been formed. They almost look like the potholes I'm sure you would have seen in Bangalore. I was very curious looking at those, and apparently they're actually called as potholes, like the feature themselves. The geological feature is called as pothole. I was like, who would have guessed? So anyway,
Yeah.
it's just a Bangalorean me, I guess, that got excited looking at them in
No,
Meghalaya of
I'm
all the
actually
places.
very glad you mentioned this. This is something I'd forgotten. But now that you mention it, I remember while doing the river trek, there were parts of the trek where we were told to be careful where we're stepping because of these potholes. And
Right,
if I'm
right,
not
right.
mistaken, I remember at that time being like, oh, like you can, like, basically cracking a very similar Bangalore joke. So I had completely forgotten about that. But yeah. Those were there. Those were definitely there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just found them interesting, right? And again, just goes back to the natural beauty of the place, also, right? You have so many different things, right? From all of the things we mentioned, from the water bodies and everything, and now we have these geological
Yeah.
features as well on the surface. So cool. So that's pretty much the day
Yeah.
two, you would say, right? And a lot of the things that you did and returned back to Shillong,
Yes.
correct? And Shillong was pretty much like your base camp. Is that would that be right to say, or did you actually shift base after like a couple of days in Shillong?
We shifted base. That's correct. So the first couple of nights were the Shillong homestay. And after this, we, as part of the Chalo Hopper itinerary, you don't have to stay a night in Shillong. I stayed on an extra day beyond the Chalo Hopper itinerary, so I stayed one more night in Shillong. But otherwise, no. Otherwise, that's you're
Okay.
done with Shillong. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So where are we going from here?
Yeah, so day 3, you get to sort of have a relaxed start because it's just been a very hectic first 2 days.
Oh yeah.
We then were taken to the homestay we were staying at Rockcliffe. The owner's house. He's into vintage cars. So his own house is also another museum. And it's a very nice vintage car collection. And again, a lot of stuff done with recycled materials. So we spent a couple of hours there. Then you make your way to this village called the Pinter Village. Now,
Okay.
but on the way, the plan was actually to stop at, and we did stop at this place called the Latelam Canyons. I mean, fun fact, Latelam literally means the end of the hills or end of the world. And it's actually that. But whatever I'm describing to you, Seth, is from pictures because our luck was that by the time we reached, I think it was noon, and it was very foggy. So it was a very clear morning in Shillong at least, but obviously you're going up a certain elevation to the Latelam Canyon because basically it's like you're literally at the end of the hills and you're looking down this sort of canyon, and we didn't see anything. Literally, as soon as we parked our traveler in the car park, it started raining in true Meghalaya style. The clouds came together, it became very dark, and yeah, we didn't see anything. But the pictures, it looks gorgeous. I believe Rock On 2 was shot here as well. So again, if anyone has seen the movie, I haven't. But if anyone has seen the movie, maybe they can spot the place. But it had its own charm, you know. We ate some Maggie, which is a very typical thing to do in cold weather. So we ate some Maggie, had some fun. But yeah, we unfortunately couldn't see the place. So I think the tip there is to go there early. Better go there in the morning. I think we sort of overstayed our welcome at the owner's house in Shillong because we were so fascinated by the vintage cars. But yeah, I mean that's fine. And then we continued to Pinter Village. But the drive to Pinter was very very scenic. Again, another thing I would never have done on my own simply because you would not know where to stop. But we had lunch, I remember, in one of the most literally picturesque settings I can imagine having lunch in. So it was just this, I mean, a log of wood in the middle of the lake. The lake is called, and I'm pretty sure I'm getting the pronunciation incorrect. So anyone who from Meghalaya or Chalo Hoppo, if they're listening to this, I'm really sorry in advance. But it's the Pung Ar Sneer Lake, I think. And it was amazing. Like Chalo Hoppo had packed lunch on banana leaves. We were just sitting in I wish I could share a picture, but like we were just sitting in the middle, like there's 7 of us and our guide and driver sitting on this log of wood, and you're just like surrounded by these amazing hills. The water is beautiful. You're feeding the fish, and it's so peaceful. I mean, really, it was one of my best meals ever. And even though it was dal chawal, it was out of the world. So yeah, I just wanted to say this because again, just going back to the point you made, right? Some of these things you may never do on your own, not because you may not want
Right.
to, you just literally will not know that there is such
Yeah.
a place, right? You'll continue driving. Our guide and Chalo Hoppo knew that there was this sort of place. And the first time he asked us to get off, we were like, but where are we eating? And then literally 5 minutes later, we were like, wow, is this where we're having our lunch? Because, so yeah, just going back to the, sometimes the benefits of traveling in a group and, discovering these new things. But yeah, so we did that. And then we go to Pinter. So just one thing about Meghalaya, I think people may have heard about the fact that Meghalaya is just generally a clean state.
Sure.
And there's this village there called Mawling Nong, which was
Right.
chosen many years ago, I think in 2003, as Asia's cleanest village. I think what happened since then is that, of course, Mawling Nong became the more famous one. So a lot of tourists go there. So Chalo Hoppo tries to give us the same experience, but by taking you to hopefully sort of the lesser crowded places. So instead of taking us to Mawling Nong, they took us to Pinter. And again, very clean. It's a very clean place. Like, I don't even know if it's cleaner than Mawling Nong or not, but very, very clean. You see the village life. They take you around, you meet the locals, you meet the kids, you talk to them, you can play football with them, whatever. By the time we reached, it was, I would say, around 6 or maybe 5. You have some chai with the locals. And I think what was really nice is that what Chalo Hoppo planned is a local sort of musical performance. So you go to someone's house and there are a bunch of these musicians and they're playing on the local instruments. So it's very intimate and very nice. You can join in with them, you can dance. We all danced, we had a great time. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, especially even walking through the village. A fun fact about Pinter is that there are an average of like 6 or 7 kids per family. So there are a lot of kids. But it was very good to know about their schooling system and, how there's a lot of emphasis on educating them, which was very satisfying to know. And in fact, actually, there is a Bangalore connection with Pinter Village, which blew my mind because I was like, what are the odds? But basically, a lot of children have apparently gone to Bangalore to do their higher studies beyond, after a certain class. And they go on to work there also. So we incidentally stopped at a chai stall, a sort of tuck shop, where the lady who was running the shop, she had returned from Bangalore. She had studied in Bangalore, worked there, and she had returned from Bangalore. So she was talking in Kannada. I was like, what are the odds? Like, these are the sort of experiences when you travel. It's just amazing.
Yeah. So it's just not the potholes, yeah?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, not just the potholes. So, I was talking to her about Bangalore and I got very excited, of course, because I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a lot of fun. The musical performance was a lot of fun. And after spending some time there, we went to our accommodation for that night, which is a sort of this guest lodge.
Yeah, I mean, again, a very different sort of a day, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of experiences, and I think you also needed it to be a little relaxed given how hectic and high adrenaline the previous day was, right? So I'm glad that you got to take this one a little bit slower, and you actually got to do I would call this the real fine dining, right? With sitting on the
yes,
in the middle of a lake on a log, like, oh my God, what is that?
absolutely.
So I'm glad you got to enjoy that, and also I guess in this village you probably lived the actual or the real rock on experience with the local musicians giving a performance for you, and I'm glad this way you also kind of got to enjoy and spend some time with the locals, right? Because again, one of the risks of going with a very generic type of group trip is that you probably are very cut off because you're just busy doing things or seeing places and not really having an opportunity to interact with the locals there, which is also a very essential part of the overall experience of a place, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm really glad that you got to enjoy this bit as well. And what was day 4 looking like?
So so day 4 is back to being hectic. So Chalo Hoppo, they try to alternate. They try to give you one relaxed day or whatever their version of relaxed is. I'm just joking. It is relaxed. And then you have a very sort of adventure-driven day. So day 4 is back to being adventurous. So we go to this place called Shillong. And actually, I think more people are familiar with Doki. And Shillong is just close to Doki. But again, Doki is the more touristy one, right? But just to give some idea of where we are geographically, you are now basically heading to Umnot River. And that's very close to the India-Bangladesh border. In fact, my iPhone weirdly picked up Bangladesh time even though we were still on India. So I was getting everything wrong by half an hour. And then we finally figured out why. But yeah, you go to Phnom Penh and I think a lot of people think of the river as Doki River. That's how it's become famous. But actually, the river's name is Umnot River. And Doki is one of the villages. We went to Snorkeling. And yeah, actually, this is the river. I don't know whether your listeners would know. It went viral a couple of years ago, I think in November or something. There was this one picture of Doki River. I don't know whether you saw it, because it's called the Crystal River. Now, essentially, if it doesn't rain, like if it's on clear days, so typically I think in the November to February season, or even any other season, if it's not rain, the water is so clean and transparent that you can see right to the bottom of the riverbed. So it's called the Crystal River. Now, unfortunately for us, it had poured the previous night. So there was no chance we were going to see this. But I have a friend who went, I think, to Meghalaya in November, like a few years ago. And he said, yeah, I could see right to the bottom. And there's a reason it's called the Crystal River. So I remember this image that had gone viral a couple of years ago. It was literally like you think the boats are floating on air because the water is so transparent, right? So this is that river for people who, just to give some context, because people may have seen the image, but so this is that same river, and it's actually, I think, known as one of India's cleanest rivers. But basically what you're doing there is you sort of have the day, like at least half a day to yourself. We did a boat ride around the river. Again, I mean, if people want to check out the pictures, there are some pictures, of course, on the internet and on our blog post on Meghalaya. It's beautiful. I mean, you're just sort of boating through these hills and the water is clear and everything. And after a boat ride, you're sort of left to your own devices. But again, a lot of adventure. So cliff jumping, which I obviously didn't do. Actually, no, that's incorrect. I did inadvertently end up doing cliff jumping. So yeah, this day again ended up being very, I don't know, memorable for me. Actually, because there was this one sort of not very high rock, and I went up there 2-3 times thinking that I can do it. But each time I just got very scared. Obviously, you're wearing your life jackets and everything, but still, And I think finally, one of the Chalo Hopo supervisors who are there to, around to help you or anything, I think he just got fed up of seeing me come there so many times and wasting other people's times, right? Because so I didn't know this, but he came from behind, picked me up and jumped with me into the river. I'm saying it very calmly right now. But in that moment, I remember being quite stunned because I was like, wow, what has just happened to me? But yeah, I mean, I guess that was the only way I would have done it. So in theory, I have done cliff jumping, but I can't take credit for it because I was not the one who jumped. But yeah, I think it's again one of those days which I will say really pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I knew I was safe because I have never, like I said before, forget like the river trek, we were swimming in a stream or whatever, floating. Here, you're literally swimming in a river if you want to. And I never thought I would do this ever. So, I don't even know swimming, but whatever I was doing, flapping around, I was still doing it. I never really thought I would, so that's why the Meghalaya trip for me, of course, the natural beauty was one thing, but I think when I look back, it was also one of those trips where you discover new aspects about yourself. I mean, will I voluntarily go swimming in a river now? Maybe not. But the fact that I did it once at least in life, so days like day 4 and snorkeling, I'll always remember for even those aspects. But basically, that's the thing with snorkeling. You do boating, you can do all of this, you can do kayaking. So yeah, I did a bit of kayaking on the way back. Like on the way back to, when I say way back, I mean like the starting spot where you leave your bags and everything. So yeah, after all this adventure, you have some good food. Again, a lot of our food was dal chawal and some meat. So typically chicken or pork. But everything tastes very good, and we can talk about the food later, but everything tastes amazing. And then you have the option of doing zip lining because you're quite high. And I didn't do that. I was done with my adventure for the day. But yeah, you can do some zip lining, and there's this very long and rickety, if I may add, suspension bridge, which you can walk across. We all did that. I will not lie. I found the walk a bit scary because it does shake. And there are a lot of people on it in one go, but it's really worth it for the views. And again, you get that sort of adrenaline going when you're walking across it. But yeah, it was largely manageable, and really the views are amazing. So after doing all of this, it's almost early evening and nothing much after this. We did a detour to go to the India-Bangladesh border, which was fun.
Okay.
So the border crossing, I mean. So we just enjoyed some Bangladeshi snacks, got your customary photos, and yeah, then you're heading back. I think one thing to flag, and I checked this at the time of writing my blog post. I don't know if the situation has improved now. The roads to Schnopperding and Docky and this whole area from where we were staying at least were really in a bad condition because they were doing some road works, and with the rain it becomes worse.
Right.
And evening traffic when you're heading back, it becomes even worse. So that was a bit of a bummer, but in the larger scheme of things, probably not. But for some travelers, of course, that's a priority. And it's not the most comfortable ride. I don't know what the situation is literally as on day to day, but yeah.
One important dynamic of this group trip or group trips like this is also the group itself, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the company you're traveling with, because that could, I won't say make or break, but it could, right?
Yeah.
So how was your experience, like just with the other folks on the trip, and how you folks bonded together?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked this, and my friends from that trip will be very happy you've asked this question. No, so it was amazing, Seth. I think this was one of those trips where everything came together. This is the first time I was traveling in a group like this. I was going with a friend, so I had that, for lack of better word, comfort that at least one person I know on this group I get along with. So what Chalo Hopper does is that they connect the travelers, the group on WhatsApp a few days before your travels. So you broadly know where people are from. But general apprehension, most average travelers will have, right? But it was amazing. I think on day one itself. So I think by the time we did the what I'm calling the forest walk in Umiam Lake, I think we were just already bonding, the bunch of us. So we were 7. 6 girls and 1 boy. Yeah. So I felt it was a perfect group size, not too big, not too small.
Yeah.
So 5 of us were traveling from Delhi, 1 from Bangalore, 1 from Bombay. But really, I think we gelled so well. By end of day 1, I felt I had known these people for a very long time. So no, it was great. And in fact, they'll be very happy if I take their names, because I didn't mention their names on the blog post, and they were very upset with me. So I was like, okay, sorry, I'll fix this on the podcast. So yeah, basically, so the friend I was traveling with, who I've known from law school, her name is Suveni. The others from Delhi are Vishakha, Kriti, Yashika, and the girl from Bombay is Mohini, and the sole boy on the trip was Anirudh from Bangalore. So yeah, we've become very, very good friends, and I think if anyone ever asks me, do you recommend a group trip, I would 100% say yes. It is a hit and a miss, like you said. But yeah, I mean, like, at least this one experience has made me more open-minded to it. I think it's also set the bar very high, so I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I had a lot of fun with the group, a lot of fun. And I think in the same vein, I would want to mention about the guide. Because he was a big part of the group dynamics. His name is Nick, the Chalo Hoppo person.
Okay.
In fact, if you Google or whatever, if you see TripAdvisor reviews of Chalo Hoppo, lot of people have talked about Nick, especially in things like, this whole cliff jumping and all. He would really push me and be like, look, I'm there, just do the jump, do it. So he was great taste in music. And all around, I think we all just got along so well that it was a big part of why I enjoyed Meghalaya.
Okay, yeah. Shout out to the gang, and shout out to Nick for pushing you, literally also, I think, right, from the cliff. So that's really great to hear. But this is what now, day 4, end of day 4. Yeah. Time really flies, even on the podcast as we've been discussing this. So you did all of this fun stuff at Schnopperding, and did you halt for the night at the same place, or what is the plan then?
Same place. So we halted at the same guest lodge that night as well. Yeah.
Okay. And what was in store for the next day?
So the next day was what we all read about Meghalaya, right? The root bridges, the living root bridges, which I think a lot has been written about, but I think you can keep writing about them because they're amazing. So just for some context for people who may not know, it's a very ancient thing, these living root bridges. I think effectively they came up because Meghalaya, you're looking at like a lot of places which are high altitude and so much vegetation that from crossing from one place to another, and in the middle you throw in waterfalls, streams, etc. How do you do
Right.
that, right? And a lot of rain and everything. So it's really like an architectural sort of invention they came up with, where you are effectively, I don't want to get into technicalities and I don't want to get something wrong, but you're basically building a bridge of the roots of like this ficus elastica tree, because they're very strong, and they're these rubber trees with bamboo. And you're building, and it's obviously not an overnight job. It's years and years of like strengthening the bridge. And I think it takes around a minimum of 30 years. So that's why it's a very ancient thing. And that's 30
Right.
years before the first stage of a bridge can become functional. And even that, from what we were told, only around 5 or 10 people can cross it in a day. So it takes a lot of time for a lot of people to cross in a given day. And they're actually on I think they're currently on UNESCO's World Heritage tentative list, the World Heritage Sites
Okay.
tentative list, because there's a lot of history to it also, and I think it's really become a part of Meghalaya's culture. Now, the famous one, which people may have seen or been to also, is Nongriat, which is the double-decker bridge. So you can even if you Google it as double-decker bridge, people will get the picture. And it's one of those stock photos of Meghalaya. But in
Right.
true Chalo Hoppo style, they didn't want to take us to Nongriat because it's very touristy. And they took us to Mokirnot, where actually again we had such a local and authentic experience. Sorry, maybe I didn't mention this earlier. Chalo Hoppo tries to tie up with local guides in each of the places they're taking you to, or locals, in the sense that, for example, the people in Schnompening who were helping us, and like that. Here they tied us. They tied up with this guy called Morning Star. He's actually a living. He's called. He calls himself as a living bridges activist. So he's the founder of the Living Bridge Foundation that's dedicated to spreading awareness, about the bridges and preserving them. He's done documentaries on them. I think he's doing or has done something with BBC about them. So the fact that we were being taken by him just really added to the experience, because he knows so much. I think even Nongriat has a huge trek to actually get down to the bridge. But so does this one where we were going. It's an easy, when I say trek, it's like they're proper steps. Just in terms of like couple of very maybe obvious tips is that you are really in a very high vegetation area. So just be careful about what you wear. It's very tempting to wear shorts because it's very hot and humid. But yeah, then you're going to be bitten by a lot of insects and mosquitoes. So just keep those things in mind, and definitely have a good breakfast on the day of this, because it's just a lot of walking. But yeah,
Right.
coming back to the area, so yeah, we basically go down like these steps, and on the way, we walked across a couple of bridges. So we actually got to walk on the longest route bridge in the world, like in Meghalaya and in the world. So that's around 53 meters. And I think it was around 90 years old. We also walked on a bridge that's around 200 years old. So,
Oh my God. Okay.
yeah, it's a bit like sort of disconcerting in the beginning because you're walking on like tree roots. It's very sturdy and someone is walking with you, but then you get the hang of it. And then, of course, the views are amazing. It's just one of those aspects of Meghalaya. You have to just experience it. You can read up a lot about it, but unless you experience it, it's really not the same.
No, I mean, this is definitely one of those things where you can say only in Meghalaya, right? And I smiled a little bit at the beginning when you mentioned, I think it was at the Umiam Lake or wherever, where you said, not the root bridge, just the regular bridge.
Yeah.
We walked in that. I was like, yeah, in Meghalaya, you have to clarify. And yeah, this is really almost like a architectural / natural or whatever.
Yeah.
Such a marvelous feat, right?
Yeah.
And imagine having thought about this and having just the locals also being enterprising enough to actually think about this and build this and also preserve this, right? That's another thing,
Yeah.
that they haven't really just done it as a one-time thing and then left it like either through overuse or whatever, like just destroyed it.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
But what is this, like a half-day thing, you think, or how much time does this take?
Yeah, I remember leaving at a reasonable hour from that guest lodge. And yeah, half day thing. Like I think we were done by early afternoon. And then we were rewarded by an amazing lunch at a local's house. And that's again thanks to Morningstar. He had some connection, some relative of his. I hope we didn't intrude, but they were very welcoming. And we had lunch with them. So some very local, local vegetables and pork, chicken tongue or something, some part of a chicken which I had never eaten before. Very tasty. Some nice tea, and again, just mingling with the locals, experiencing that sort of very local way of living, and seeing how they how they make their food and all of that. I think this would be around by 3 you're sort of done, and then we made our way onwards to our next stop, which was basically Cherrapunji, which locally is actually known as Sohra.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. I think we had a guest previously as well. They mentioned that the name change or whatever the corruption, let's say corruption of the name, right? Sohra was the original name, and I think during the time of the British,
Yes.
it went from Sohra to Sahara to Chera to Cherrapunji or whatever it's known as today. So that was an interesting story as well. And is it far enough for you to actually reach there by evening and then explore it the next day, or was it the same day thing?
No, typically next day, because by that again, essentially because the sun has set,
Sure.
right, by the time you've reached. So no, I think that for the rest of the evening, we just checked into our accommodation, which was like you could call it a not a homestay, but like a lodge, and we basically had dinner, and you're just left to yourselves then.
Okay, cool. So next day we're pretty much looking at exploring Cherrapunji then, right?
Yes. What Chalo Hopo did is that there's quite a bit to do in Sora because there are a lot of waterfalls and all. So we sort of amongst us as a group landed on what we, and I don't, because we had effectively one day, it's not possible to see everything. So we landed on what all we would want to do. What we did is that we went to a waterfall called Wei Sodong, which is this 3-tiered waterfall. Again, one of those stock photos of Meghalaya. You definitely have seen it. But it's like basically this 3-tiered waterfall with like this amazingly colored pool right at the bottom. And there's an easy way to get to it. Again, a lot of steps involved because it's not a very high waterfall. The beauty, I think, of Wei Sodong is just the 3 tiers, and that blue, the color of that blue is just something else. If in case you don't want to do the trek at all, whether it's the difficult way or the easy way, they do have these viewpoints, several viewpoints from where you can see the waterfall quite clearly. So it's not like you have to do the treks to get to see the waterfall. After we spent some time there, we went to this other relatively hidden waterfall. I don't even know the name. Chalo Hopper just took us there, very secluded. Of course, there were some other people, and I guess thanks to Instagram and stuff, some of these secluded places also become less secluded, but still relatively less secluded. And again, for those who swim and stuff too, I think all of this is such a treat. We spent quite a bit of time there. There also, there's this really high, nice tiered waterfall. And after spending some time there, we halted at a restaurant for lunch. And then we went to the Arva caves. So you mentioned you've had a guest before who's talked about their caving experience. So caving is a big thing in Meghalaya, and I think it's home, like Meghalaya. I mean, this is some stuff I had looked up while writing the blog. I think it's home to like 9 of India's 10 longest caves. So the Arva caves, the one in Sohra, they are very famous for their limestone formations and for the fossils. So it was quite cool. It was also very different from the rest of the trip so far because you're not outdoor, right? You're like indoor somewhere. I mean, you're indoor, I say like loosely, but you're like, but it was a lot of fun. You have to be ready for the crowds. Again, it's one of those, most of the things in Sohra will be fairly touristy and crowded, except for example, maybe that secluded waterfall that they took us to. There are accessible parts of the cave which take around half an hour, 45 minutes to explore, depending on the crowd. There is a fair bit of bending and crouching to do. And by the time we got out of the cave, the sun had set. So even though it was just like maybe 6, But yeah, so I think we mainly did these 3 places. But I think like another famous thing about Sohra, and again, another stock picture is the Naukalekai Falls, which is India's tallest plunge waterfall. We really wanted to go there. We knew it's touristy, but yeah, I guess time didn't permit us to go. And by evening, because the sun has set and it's foggy, this and that, you have to go there in the morning generally. But yeah, that's another very popular place in Sohra to go to.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Really, I think the caving experience also kind of adds to the diversity of all of the different things you got to do, right? Yeah. It's been like a lot of adventure also, even though you're saying you're not too keen on doing a bunch of things, but you have clearly done a lot of them. And we'll definitely link to the other episode we did on the caving experience too. This was a very different experience in that the guest we had he and his friend. They wanted to do something offbeat, and they went into a cave that is not very commercial and common and touristy, and it was just the two of them
Oh,
basically,
wow.
and they end up getting lost there, and pretty much spending the whole day within the caves until they could make it out by themselves. So it was an interesting experience. We'll link it for those of you who are interested. But overall, it's been like a very, very exciting journey, and you've beautifully shared a lot of these wonderful places, and we're probably just scratching on the surface right now, right? Juhi, there's so many different things to do, and I mean, beyond the known places, like the ones that are lesser explored and probably known just to locals, those are a different story in themselves, right? So we probably will never be able to do justice on Meghalaya, even though we've done like 2 or 3 episodes now. But anything beyond or besides these places that you already touched upon, do you want to give a quick shout out on, even if not in detail, or the ones that you couldn't cover?
This was the end of the Chalo Hopper trip. So next day was flying back to your respective, home locations. But my friend and I, we stayed an extra day, and like I mentioned, and so what we did is that we got dropped off at a certain place, from where we went to the Morphlang Sacred Forest, which is another very well-known place in Meghalaya, very close to Shillong, around like whatever 30-40 kilometers from from Shillong. So Morphlang is basically, again, it's a very like a religious sort of forest for them. And Morphlang means moss covered stone in the Khasi language. So there are a lot of monoliths here for different purposes, and basically it's a forest protected by the locals, and I think the specific tribe is the Lingdo tribe or the Lingdo clan. And the idea is that in like in ancient times, there were a lot of rituals that were performed here to protect the forest and the local deities. There's a certain part of the forest that's accessible, where you can walk around with a guide, who give you an overview of the vegetation, the rituals that would be performed, and all of that. It has a lot of like plants and flowers and mushrooms and that sort of a stuff, and all of it's considered holy. And the whole idea is that the big thing about Morphlang is that the belief that if you're not supposed to take anything from the forest. So if you pluck a flower, a petal, or anything, for lack of better words, you will be cursed. So they share those folklore with you, and it's a very interesting experience, very beautiful. And even the tree, the Rudraksh tree, which is considered holy by the Hindus, that can also be found in a lot of great numbers here. So that was a very interesting experience. And another thing I would mention, which we didn't do, which I may want to do someday, is the David Scott Trail. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's this trail from the colonial times. David Scott, I think, he was a British administrator. So
Right.
it's a trail that actually starts from, I think, very close to Morphlang. And it stretches between, I think, Morphlang and another place called Lad Morphlang. So it's part of a larger trade route, like a 100-kilometer trade route that was constructed during the colonial times. But this, what they call the David Scott Trail, is around 16 kilometers. So, apparently, if you can do it on foot, and it will take around 4-5 hours to do. And it's supposed to be very scenic. I've seen some pictures, and what the Chalo Hopo people and the locals were describing, it really does seem beautiful. You can apparently also cycle. So maybe that's another thing. And apart from that, like what I mentioned, Lakelam Canyons, which we didn't do, maybe something like Non-Griat if you just want to get the complete route bridge experience. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And like you rightly pointed out, even for people who are interested in the culture part of it, there's a lot of different tribes in Meghalaya, right?
Yeah.
The Khasi, Jatia, Garo people are just like some of them. They're obviously probably in the majority, but there's a lot of different tribes as well. And even I know we didn't touch upon it a lot, but from the local cuisine perspective also,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of different things you can try out. Obviously, like pork and bamboo shoots and all of that is the more common and popular type of dish that most people try out, besides the momos, I guess.
Yeah, great momos.
But yeah, and things like the local root beers, right?
Yes.
Like every region, every tribe probably has their own version of that. I believe the one here, the popular one here at least, is called the Kyat, Kyat.
Correct.
So that's something as well. Even from a local foods perspective, there were so many different ones. Very interesting, like Pomaloy, probably butchering a lot of the names, but rice-based dish. Jado,
Yes.
another popular street food. Yeah, probably something you might have come across or heard.
Yeah.
And then Puklane, which is a sweet dish made of rice and jaggery. So yeah, a lot of different things. Like even if you're a foodie or a person who appreciates culture, there's definitely stuff for you. And I don't know. I don't even want to start listing out the waterfalls that one can or cannot do, because so many of them will just be nameless and still be as beautiful as the popular, the ones that make it to the stock photos, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of interesting things definitely to do. I'm glad that you had a wonderful experience doing this with Shallow Hopo. And for somebody who wants to reach out to you to chat more about this or your other travels, what's the best way to do so? Juhi, please share your blog as well as your socials.
The blog is forumhopping.wordpress.com, like you mentioned. I personally am not on social media, but the blog for sure is. So the handle on Instagram is @forumhopping. If you just DM us there, I'll be more than happy to then connect offline, and whether it's about Meghalaya or any of the other travels, and share any details or anything else that I can.
Yeah, no problem. For hopping definitely is on social
Yes.
media, like you said, and we'll make sure to add the socials in the show notes of the description of the episode. Again, thank you so much, and my apologies for making you wait for such a long time to get on the podcast. It was just different things happening, so glad that dera per durasta, like they
Yes.
say, and hopefully have you back on the podcast too. Now that you made your debut, you already sound like a pro, so maybe we'll also have you back whenever you're ready for another episode. But thank you so much, Joey. It was such a pleasure talking with you, and thank you again for sharing all the beautiful stories and experiences about this abode of the clouds, Meghalaya,
Yes.
like they say.
No, thank you so much, Seth. Like I said, this pleasure is all mine. I think it was worth the wait. I'm happy the first time I've spoken on a podcast is about Meghalaya, which is a very dear trip to me. Needless to say, I love your podcast as well. So all in all, I think I couldn't have asked for a better debut. And more than happy to be on your show again. And really, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joey. We'll definitely keep in touch and we'll make that happen.
Thank you.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter @Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.